Hi, it's Morgan with 1455. It is our mission to advance the art and craft of the written word and to build a dynamic and innovative creative community. We offer a variety of free online and in-person programs, which are fully supported by our sponsors and by viewers like you. If you would like to make a donation of any amount, please visit 1455litarts.org and click support. Your contribution will be greatly appreciated. We'll see you on the next one.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to 1455's author series. It's always a pleasure and privilege to have you here checking this out. This event speaks for itself. 1455, as always, is just kind of the happy middleman to bring amazing talent. And boy, this last week, we have had some serious talent in the house. For those of you that don't know, if this is your first time checking out one of our events, welcome, and it's wonderful to have you. I'm Sean Murphy, and I'm the executive director of 1455. And 1455 simply is a nonprofit literary organization, and our core mission is to showcase writers and writing by any and all means necessary. And mostly in 2020, we've been doing that via our virtual free events. And as a point, we make it all of our public programming free, including our Lit Fest. And this is no exception. And one of the ways that we carry out our mission is to find partners and friends that have similar missions. So it is, once again, an extraordinary pleasure and honor to team up with the historic Potter's House from DC. We are joined tonight by Talia Jaffe from the Potter's House, and I would love to welcome her on to say a few words about the Potter's House and their mission and how you can get copies of Deesha's book and support independent booksellers. Talia, always a pleasure to see you. Welcome.
You as well, Sean. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. As Sean said, I'm Talia Jaffe, the Events and Operations Manager here at the Potter's House. We're delighted to have you all here and absolutely thrilled to welcome Deesha, and as always, the brilliant Sean Murphy from 1455 Literary Arts. For those of you who don't already know the Potter's House, welcome, and for those of you who are our old friends, we're so glad you're back. For those who are newer to the Potter's House, we are a nonprofit social enterprise, a bookstore, cafe, and event space, and we've been serving up radical hospitality in the Adams Morgan community since 1960. As you can imagine, our role as a community connector looks a little different these days. Interactions in the shop and online have become even more precious, and our commitment to hospitality continues. To give you just one example, through our Pay It Forward program, we gave away 1,000 free meals last month to neighbors who would otherwise have gone hungry. That's just one manifestation of our commitment to hospitality, and it's one we intend to continue. And so are gatherings like this one. While we can't gather in person, we're still working hard to find ways to bring folks together, and tonight's event is one of them. We are especially thrilled to have Deesha here with us this evening because her debut National Book Award finalist collection of essays is nothing short of exceptional. The Secret Lives of Church Ladies masterfully elevates the tension between the world we live in and the world we want to live in, the people we are and the people we want to be, and the particular vulnerability Black women experience at the intersection of this tension. And I'm so excited for you to experience this story with us tonight. You can purchase your copy of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies and support the Potter's House by ordering through our partners at bookshop.org. I'll drop the links in the event comment shortly. Again, thank you all for joining us, and Deesha and Sean, thank you in advance for what I know will be an incredibly meaningful dialogue.
Thank you, Talia, and thanks for the work.
Thanks, Talia.
It's so inspiring to me, and as I said, it's absolutely my pleasure to team up, and we are stronger together. So I look forward to more of this in 2021 and beyond.
We do too.
Right on. All right, without further ado, let me start by saying our special guest this evening has at least 3 things in common with Douglas Stewart, who I talked to last week. One, they were both featured in this summer's 1455 Lit Fest. 2, they both endured the 1455 interview. Both video of both things for each are available on our YouTube page and our website. But third, and by far most important, they are both National Book Award finalists. So, wow, what a genuine honor and pleasure and privilege to be able to share some screen time with Deesha. And, I feel like the old commercial, like, not only am I the donor, but I'm a fan or a customer. This book, boy, did it rock my world. And it just is such a worthy, it's been elevated accordingly. And you're going to see why when you hear her read and as we talk about it. But let me introduce her and we'll bring her on without further ado. Deesha's debut story collection, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, was a finalist for the 2020 National Book Award for Fiction. It focuses on Black women, sex, and the Black church. Deesha is also the co-author of Co-Parenting 101, Helping Your Kids Thrive in Two Households After Divorce, written in collaboration with her ex-husband. Her work has been listed as notable in the Best American Essays series, and her writing on race, parenting, gender, and culture has appeared in, among other outlets, the New York Times, the Washington Post, McSweeney's, the Rumpus, Brevity, Apogee Journal, Catapult, Harvard Review, and ESPN's The Undefeated, as well as various anthologies. She's a Kimbilio Fiction Fellow and a past Pushcart Prize nominee for essay writing in Full-Grown People. You can find her online at www.deeshaphilyaw.com, and we'll make sure we put those links into all of our social stuff. Deesha, thank you for being here.
Hey, Sean.
It is a pleasure. I recognize that brick wall. You're rocking.
Yes.
You're rocking my steps. It's all good.
I had to get new frames, actually. There's a little crack and they just arrived. I have to replace them. So rather than get new ones, I just got the same ones because,
I don't know if I would have recognized you otherwise.
I know. These are like my signature frames now. So good to see you again.
Likewise, and I really greatly appreciate you taking the time, because you've been a busy girl these last few months as this goes up, and I have to say it's really been an extraordinary delight to see the attention that this book is getting, and having read it, I get it. So I want to dive in, but I think why don't we start right at the top?
Okay.
What changes for a writer after a year like this? Like a year like you've had?
Just from a logistical standpoint, your inbox changes. So there's a lot more engagement, and for me, that translates into, I want to stay connected to people who are really interested in the book and that it was really meaningful for them. And so I'm spending more time connecting with readers, which I absolutely love. And so as more people learn about the book, the time that I devote to that has changed. Someone asked me today, has being nominated for the National Book Award impacted how I approach my writing now? Like, am I nervous? Like, does everything have to be, award winning or nominated? And I just, one thing I had to make peace with is like, I can't think about that part of it. I still approach writing the same way that I always did. So that part hasn't changed. But I feel a greater sense of privilege. And so I know now that I have an opportunity that I didn't have before, that I can actually support other writers, in more, in bigger ways. And I think about what Toni Morrison said, that like the whole point of getting any kind of power or privilege is to empower somebody else. And so I spend more time thinking about that.
That's great. That's great. And we'll get in. I want to talk a little bit more later on about kind of this notion of community and how you certainly embody.
Thank you.
I think that's for spiritual reasons, not to mention practical reasons, that's so important. But also, I think people overlook for artistic reasons.
Yeah.
Paying it forward and being connected and elevating others is in the best sense of the word a very selfish act, because it's one of the rare pleasures I think we can control, where some of the stuff is fleeting or illusory. But the focus right now is on you, and I think for especially for people that haven't read the book yet, or are coming to this and see this, which is it's a great cover, it's a great title. Talk about the title and because I mean, again, having read it, I know, but talk about how the title came together, and did the title precede the work, or when you were done, you realized, wow, there's kind of a recurring theme here?
Yeah, sort of a little bit of both. I realized that for the last 20 years, I haven't been writing about church ladies per se, but I've been writing about dissatisfied women. And, because I'm sort of mining my own memory and my childhood, and nostalgia is really big for me, for my, growing up in the South, but no longer living there. So all of that's really ripe for me and very present. And so the women are church women, but it's, early on it was that thread of dissatisfaction because I was dissatisfied. And then when I kind of hit a wall on my novel, the agent is still my agent, she's the agent I had for my co-parenting book. She knew I was working on a novel. She was really anxious to see it, and I just wasn't delivering. But I was writing these short stories, and she's local to me, so I would read at events, and she'd come out. And so after one of these events, she said, "I'm really liking these church lady stories." And so she first conceptualized it as, as something that could be a collection. And that was her suggestion, that while I was kind of on hiatus from this novel that I was just completely stymied by, that maybe I could get intentional about these stories. And so that's where the idea came from. And I wish I could remember the actual origin of The Secret Lives of Church Ladies, but I don't. I don't remember it. I don't know if I said it or if Danielle said it, my agent. But the idea of the collection was hers. And then I got really intentional about the stories, so that they all have church lady in them or someone that I consider church lady adjacent. So they have someone in their life who's influential, who's rooted in the church. And so that's how I came to kind of pivot away from working on a novel to a collection.
Well, and it's like you set the bar really high, like a title that's that evocative and descriptive needs to be delivered on, and it so does. I think another thing that's really neat about the collection that I certainly enjoyed, although I will absolutely make it a point to say this is written for anyone of any age, but you and I are, if not contemporaries, semi-contemporaries. I think it's an extra treat that there's an old school sensibility.
Yes.
70s and 80s, some of the cultural references, none of them are gratuitous. They're all, earned and lived. But I wonder if you've noticed, and again, I've seen it on social media, but if there's a certain age, I'll say our age, really, I would imagine our age and older, this is really resonating. Artistically, for sure, but also kind of culturally. Have you been getting that feedback?
I've been hearing that, especially, around the nostalgia, so I'm not the only one, that misses those days or that remembers seeing Purple Rain in the theater and going, weekend after weekend, and all of the television that we watched, so I've definitely heard from, our Gen X crew. But the other demographic, they're younger Black women who haven't had great experiences with the church. So a lot of that, the confinement, the restriction, the judgment, when I hear about that from readers, they tend to be younger Black women. And then I've also been surprised at hearing from older Black women who themselves would be considered church ladies, who are older than us. I guess I don't know what I was expecting, that they might find it a little too provocative, but they're loving it too. So I'm really thankful for that.
Yeah. And we talked about this a bit in the 1455 interview. As a writer and reader and critic, I'm not nervous about subject matter and material, but I also, of course, especially talking about a book like this, want to be very, respectful and diligent about, my place as a white male. But I would just say that on one hand, it's so obvious that this is in many senses written for Black women by a Black woman about Black women things. A, it certainly contains multitudes, A, and B, as we talked about in the 1455 interview, I think we celebrate Toni Morrison as, and you put it so perfectly, you were talking about her comment or quote about, she made it possible, really made it possible for Black women and to tell American stories. And then I kind of countered with saying, that's absolutely true. We all, owe that service and that influence. But it's also, in my opinion, very disrespectful to pigeonhole her or you as a Black woman writer or someone that writes about Black issues, because reading that collection, of course, on many levels, I didn't know these women, but on some levels, I absolutely knew these women. These are American people, American stories, and they're talking about very, if not American, very world. We all have sexual dissatisfaction. We all have issues with spirituality and friends betraying us, etc. Family issues, to say the least. So I guess I just felt it was important to reiterate that. And again, for whatever it's worth, I mean, I'm saying that in a very celebratory way, but again, especially for people tuning in that are like, I mean, why wouldn't you want to read this book? But if someone's like, well, I don't know if this is my material, it is so not a kind of pigeonhole. And in fact, even within, the only thing I'd say about the title, right, is in a way, as I said, it's perfect. I think it's perfect, but it's a lot. There's a lot more going on. This isn't about church ladies. This is about people. So maybe talk a little bit about because you obviously worship at the altar of Tony.
Yeah.
You also agreed with me that that's part of what being a barrier breaker is, that it normalizes, for lack of a better word, like anyone can tell these stories. Anyone should tell these stories.
I mean, Toni Morrison as well as August Wilson, spoke to, and their work illustrated that, Black specificity is universal, that we can tell very specific stories about Black life and at the same time, explore these universal truths about the human experience and the human condition. And both things can be true at the same time. And, they were both very sharp with interviewers who, would question them about that and, kind of flip it and say, we don't question whether, someone who's Irish writing about an Irish, we can see that that's universal, right? And that they were just doing the same things, but writing about Black life. And so I have been so heartened that so many different people who are not Black women have reached out to say, here's how I connected with these stories, even though they aren't Black women, or even readers who they're reading it and then they're learning about that, they're delving into understand these are narratives about Black women and Black life, knowing that these are narratives that are not always taught in school, that some of us can get through college. And if we're not intentional about it, we will never read a Toni Morrison, And so I think what we're seeing is that people are hungry for these narratives and for stories about Black women, from a perspective about Black women, not someone telling you who we are, but us saying, not only this is who we are, but this is who we are in private. This is who we are. These are the things that we only tell each other. These are the things that we only tell ourselves. And so having that glimpse, people from all backgrounds have appreciated that. And I've heard from Black men that they feel like voyeurs, that they're hearing things, some of them for the first time. And I've joked and I've said to some of them, and they're like, I didn't know these things. I was like, we tell you, you guys just don't listen to us. But okay, fine. You're hearing it for the first time, right? But I really love that engagement.
Yeah, and I think in the best possible way. I'm certainly in on the joke. There's absolutely a sense in this story that one, especially a male, is kind of like having the privilege of overhearing, shop that is in the interior lives. And so there's the real value, again, artistically home run, but also I think socioculturally, there is a tremendous value, especially in a time where, whether they're paying lip service or not, there's a lot of narratives in our political discourse right now about how do we understand other people outside of our experience. And art can't do that, or if we're not seeking to find that in art, we're hopeless to do it politically. So
that's right.
Tremendous service, adding to our understanding of why America is obviously a multicultural place that contains multitudes. So I think that's a decent enough kind of teeing up for a little bit of a reading, if you would be so kind.
Sure. All right. I have changed my mind like a million times as I sat here, but I really have been moved to read something that I don't rarely read from. I think this may be only the second time I've read from Instructions for Married Christian Husbands. So I'm going to read from that. And for those who aren't familiar with it, this is me playing with form. It's like an instruction manual written by a woman who's like a serial mistress. And it says, the title says, these are instructions for the married men who keep her company. And I'll read just the first few pages of it. The basics. You, the infantilized husbands of accomplished godly women, are especially low-hanging fruit, ripe for the picking with little effort on my part. Buttery soft laughter at your attempts at humor, or eye contact that lasts a beat too long, but subtle enough that it leaves you wondering if maybe you just imagined it was a beat too long. Maybe it was just wishful thinking on your part that I leaned in closer each time you spoke, that I was really tuned into and turned on by your monologues on fantasy football and barbecue. Or maybe you just want a woman to treat you like a man for a change and not like one of her children. Despite your frustrations, you may not want to stray. Perhaps this is your first time, and you didn't imagine it would be with someone like me, dark, with short, kinky hair, someone so different from your wife. But it was my eyes, my lips, my teeth, my smile, my intellect, my breast, my easy laughter that got you. I understand you feel the need to offer some explanation for stepping out with someone like me, some reason for why I turn you on. Why do you turn me on? It's that you want me when there are so many reasons you shouldn't. That turns me on. Your hunger, your deprivation turn me on. I don't care why your wife won't fuck you properly. It's satisfaction enough simply knowing she won't. All the risk is yours, but I'll wade out into it with you. I've always enjoyed playing in the deep end. Parking. There is on-street parking in my neighborhood. I recommend you park at least 1 block away. The nearby business district provides a convenient alibi. Social media and technology. Facebook. Continue to post scripture memes about God's faithfulness and how Jesus is your all in all if you do that sort of thing. If you don't start now. See also your religion below. Because this town is small, Facebook may recommend me as a person you may know. I hope it goes without saying that you should delete this. Post a picture of your wife on Woman Crush Wednesday, hashtag WCW, but be sure to caption it that she is your crush every day. Also, post pictures of the two of you on your anniversary, her birthday, and at other random times just to say how amazing she is. Your profile picture should be a picture of the two of you. Communication. We will not exchange phone numbers. We will communicate exclusively via the texting app I asked you to download. Your phone, lock it. Require a passcode or finger swipe combination to unlock it. Photos, don't send them. Don't ask for them. Note, if you want to get caught, as some of you do, because you don't have the courage to pull the plug on your marriage directly, ignore these precautions. See also your conscience. About me, the less you know, the better, and that works both ways. Boundaries are crucial. Here's what I can tell you. I have no children, and I've never been married. My life is my own. I own a bakery, which is probably where we met. Maybe I baked your wedding cake or your daughter's birthday cake. I make the best peach cobbler in the city. I grew up watching my mother eating the crumbs and leftovers from another woman's table. I swore I never would, but here I am, grubbing, licking the edges. Thanks.
Thank you for that. And again, having really enjoyed and savored each of these stories to hear it. It's just always a thrill to hear it in the author's own voice. But speaking of voices, another thing that I think is really just a remarkable achievement here is that, I'll give props to any collection that kind of has a unified theme and a certain narrative style. I think without exception, every one of these stories has an almost radically different narrative voice, which only speaks to the power of your kind of imagination and ability. Again, there's obviously themes that emerge, but these are all different women telling different stories.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, I wanted to make sure people didn't think it was me. And it's like, these couldn't all be me, right?
Well,
Yeah, I also wanted to just look at different aspects of that tension between desire and longing and the confinement that we either put ourselves in, willingly, because of what we've been taught at church, or it's going to cost us something to give it up, so it's hard to let go of. And so that can show up in different ways. And then I think about the two stories that have teenage main characters. And I was totally like in my nostalgic bag on those, because those girls aren't grappling so much themselves, but it's the influence around them, their maternal figure, and they kind of that representation of the church. I'm thinking about Jael. She's not conflicted at all about having a crush on the preacher's wife. She's pretty, bold. So yeah, I had fun with those.
Well, yeah, and the fact that, again, from a narrative perspective, again, just a masterful stroke to have it be diary entry. So it's really unfiltered and raw. It's almost like it's a creative way to get around, having that need to be dialogue or kind of clunky exposition. It's like I'm surreptitiously looking at the diary as like, this is what this girl feels, and there's no shame in her game. She's laying it out, convincing. I would love you to talk a little bit more about, because you mentioned this in the 1455 interview, and then you mentioned it again tonight. And again, having read your work, I get it. But you talk about kind of this central theme of dissatisfied women. One thing that I to continue what we were talking about earlier, even within these very specific situations, there are these universal. Throughout this collection, there are multiple moments of intimacy, and it's just the inability to communicate or connect. So one partner isn't able to give the other partner what they want, or one partner is trying to give and failing. That's a universal, right? Everyone knows. But I think, again, you're tackling it from, there's almost the implicit societal pressure on top of whatever is going on between the sheets or between the four walls. But talk a little bit about, how you kind of came to dissatisfied women as kind of this leitmotif that propelled this.
I mean, it was out of necessity, because when I first started trying to write fiction, I was dissatisfied. I was dissatisfied in the marriage that I was in. I was dissatisfied in that I had chosen to be a stay-at-home mom, and I had a young toddler, just one at that time. I have two daughters, but my oldest, like, she never napped. And so, I felt like I wasn't doing anything for myself. I was, literally taking care of someone around the clock. And so writing was something that was a bit of an escape for me. And I just wasn't comfortable writing nonfiction. I wasn't comfortable telling my own truth in writing. I was not as brave as Jael. That's one thing I always say, is that I think she's the bravest character in the collection. She's certainly braver than me. And so it was easier to put my dissatisfaction into these characters who were matronly, and they were older than me, which is kind of how I felt. And then they were the church ladies. They were the church ladies that I remembered, and that I had always been so curious about. And so at first, I was channeling that dissatisfaction through them. And then I took a long detour into writing a parenting column and writing, essays, personal essays that talked about, to some extent, my personal experiences, but not that sense of dissatisfaction. There was still this part of my life that I really wasn't putting out, for consumption. But it was coming through in these novels that I was not finishing. And then I pivoted from those novels to the short stories within like the last 5 or so years, maybe a little longer than that. Um, and that longing, that dissatisfaction was still there. It was still there. I think one of the first stories that I wrote, not think I know, Eula. And so, the ultimate in dissatisfaction, longing, not satisfied, not being true to themselves. Um, and I think that as I became more satisfied in some ways,
Mhm.
I could start to separate out. I'm no longer writing as fiction to mask my life. Then I could really explore the interior world of these women that I imagined. And then my own stuff was kind of over here and I was dealing with it in other ways. But yeah, that's how that thread of dissatisfaction just came through. But if you think about it, if a woman is dissatisfied, you've got endless conflict, you've got endless story, endless material there.
Yeah.
And so, just like August Wilson said, he could write about Black life in America forever. I feel like I could write about dissatisfied women forever, and it would still be a multitude. It would still be varied. It would still be a surprise every time, because women have a lot to be dissatisfied about. And how do we navigate that?
Yeah, ask any wife, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so you just said a lot there in terms of meat we could pick off that bone. One of the things I think that resurfaces a lot in conversations with writers is this notion that whether it's grief, in the literal sense, or just experience, when writers are writing for catharsis, that's often best left in journals, because it needs to
Yeah.
it needs to germinate and bake.
Yes.
And the real creative achievement, in my opinion, is when the characters can go through the catharsis,
Yes.
artistically
Yes.
rendered. And that's one of the things, that you just connect over the fence. It's the characters going through the catharsis. It doesn't seem like therapy or any of that stuff. But one of the other things that the two things that occurred to me when I was thinking about this conversation were, one, kind of this generation gap, which again is universal and very, I won't even say American. I think it's very global. This notion of the parents wanting better for their kids, but also almost against their will, holding them back, either out of jealousy or out of concern that if I let them try to fly, the world's going to crush them. I feel like that theme comes up, and a general, not general, but there's an absence of men and fathers, and I think that adds a heft to these stories. I mean, it's a very female dominated series of stories, and that provides tremendous insight, especially for men or men that were brought up in the proverbial nuclear Brady Bunch household. Talk a little bit about that, though, that absence of men, and also kind of this, the generation gap. Again, it's very universal, but in these stories, it's so subtle, but it's kind of a recurring issue.
So, going back to Toni Morrison, something else she talked about was how there's this white gaze, and for many people, it's a white male gaze on the literature, and whether that's just, so we've, the first literature we read, or so much of it that was sort of shoved down our throats in school, was white men, white men, white men, and then there are people who feel that pressure of the gaze of whiteness, when they're writing. And I have never felt that pressure. And so, in addition to that, then being really intentional and saying, what if this was just about women's relationships to each other and to themselves? What if you took men out of the equation? Now, you can't fully, because, for example, in Dear Sister, the father's dead, but he is the connective tissue there. And in How to Make Love to a Physicist, she is she's in a relationship, or she's building a relationship with a guy, but it's still her lens, and he is still not the center. She ultimately, it's about how she relates to herself, and she has to get that right before she can, deal with him. So I think having the experience of saying what happens when we get to be the center of our own stories, because you were talking about politics earlier, in the larger culture, Black women are reviled and emulated, like it's always this relation to someone else, and we are the other. But what if we weren't the other? What if we were the center? And so, that's something that is important to me. And then there was a second part of your question, or at least I had a second part to my answer.
Maybe the absence of fathers and men.
Yeah. Oh, okay. And so I think the other,
keeping the daughters down intentionally.
yeah. So I think now that part of it was very organic, very subconscious. I lost my mother to breast cancer when she was 52 and I would have been 34. Is that right? No, that's not right. If she was 52, yeah, I was 34. And we had a lot of unfinished business. We made our peace before she died, but there was still a lot of unfinished business. And that was definitely the defining relationship of my life. And it wasn't until I turned this manuscript in, I was like, oh, there's a lot of mother-daughter stuff in here. I think I was working some stuff out, Mm-hmm. So I think that's why you see those relationships sort of writ large, because that's what was going on with me.
Yeah, and speaking about the whole generation gap, right? Like there is that. There are, different rules apply for better or worse with each successive generation. And I think what we see in Peach Cobbler, for instance, is how these possibilities are opening up, and we're seeing it through the lens of this obviously intelligent and beautiful young woman who is not getting the encouragement, does not have, the deck is stacked against her, but throughout that narrative, we're seeing how she's starting to put pieces together. And what I love about that story, without giving anything away, is there's a journey there, and by the end of that, it's implied, but that story's not done. The stories are never done. But that story, in a sense, is just beginning as it ends, which is such a beautiful.
Yeah, and it wasn't like that. My first draft of that story had a ending in her adulthood. She was in her 30s. She reconnects with the pastor's son. They bake a cobbler in her bakery, and they have a little tryst there in the kitchen. And none of my early readers liked that ending. Nobody liked it. I thought the scene was beautiful, and it might have been a beautiful scene, but it didn't ring true to readers. And so I thought, okay, what if instead of taking her into adolescence, and I think that was my desire to I need to know how this ends for this girl, but what if there was that ambiguity instead? And what if we end at when she's still a teenager? How does it end? And so I had to kind of go back in and look at that relationship she had with her mother, and go a little deeper there than I had in the first incarnation of this. And I also had the relationship between her and the pastor's son go deeper. They aren't as connected in the earlier version. She just tutored him. There was that tension, and then it was done until they connect 20 years later. But in this version, I felt like it rang true that when you have that kind of tension and conflict between a parent and a child, the child often is stuck. She was burdened with a truth that shouldn't have been her burden to carry. But in the end, she had nowhere to go. And that just felt like the truest thing to me.
Well, I concur. I didn't read the alternate ending, and I'd love to see that. But what I think what you achieved, Deesha, is it's an act of real artistic generosity that by the time that story ends, you don't even need, like, I certainly, I didn't go there and imagine her future per se, but it's, the reader knows that all of those things are possible, if not likely. The way
Yeah.
that story ends, you know that story, even creatively, is going to continue to write itself, and that things are going to happen. Like, her trajectory is not going to be static. It's
Right.
just, there's no question that what she's gone through, this blossom is starting to sprout. And I think leaving it at the moment when she realizes I'm going to get there, but I'm not there yet,
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
a real mic drop artistically.
Thank
So
you.
I think
Thank
you
you.
chose wisely. And that gives me an opportunity to say, another thing that I just treasure about this collection. Boy, do you know how to end a story well.
Yeah. Thank you.
I mean, I think every single one of them. But Dear Sister, the end of that story, I think I actually, I mean, I may not have literally danced around, but I mean, that delighted me so much. And it was everything a reader-writer wants to experience. There was joy, a sense of absolute, like, yes, she nailed it, but also a little bit of envy, like, God damn, how did she do that?
That's how I feel when I read. Oh gosh, so many of my favorite writers, but just that perfect something. Yeah, like Zadie Smith, I feel that way about her. And of course, Toni Morrison, great first lines, these great last lines. That one line she has in Jazz where she says something like, look where your hand is now. Do you not get chills with that? Oh, just perfect. I got to hear her read that passage and end with that line when that book was still a work in progress. She came to Yale and she read in a chapel, so beautiful surroundings. She's reading, you could hear a pin drop even though the house was packed. And she got to that part and I didn't even know I was crying until at the end when everybody just stood up. But yeah, that mic drop ending is something. Yeah.
Well, talk a little bit about, I mean, because of course it's not assumed that any of these things were first draft. That does happen usually, but were there other stories that really kind of had a metamorphosis from initial conception to what they became?
Let me
And the
think
reason I
about
ask,
that.
because that's such a basic kind of dumb question, especially for a
No.
reader. But they're so fully realized. I'm just genuinely curious if there were other ones that, whether it was because of reader feedback or when you let them sit a while, they kind of went in a different direction.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question because it's instructive, and I hope we're always learning from each other. One of the upsides of the pandemic in the early days is so many writers were offering workshops, and I was taking everything I could take because I do learn from other writers. And so the one that comes to mind in terms of revision is the one I read from, Instructions for Married Christian Husbands. It started out as a traditional narrative, but I didn't know where I was going with it. I loved the beginning about the infantilized husbands of godly women. So I was like, okay, who is this woman? She's spicy, So I wanted to keep playing with that. So I wrote, 10 to 15 pages about her, and then she her latest man, her latest husband, and how did they meet and how it becomes, a thing with them. And then I was finishing my collection. It was due, I was approaching my deadline. And I had one story left to write. And so that's the last story I wrote, but I didn't make it the last story in the collection because it didn't feel like it should be the last story. And I was looking at pieces of stories that I had, and that was one. And I was like, okay, so what happens? He falls for her, she falls for him. And I was bored with that. I didn't feel like I had anything fresh or interesting to say about that scenario of two people who, it's just going to be a no strings attached thing, and then it turns to something else. I wasn't feeling it, but I had these pages, and I love that introduction. And then there's a part that's in this story that was in those 10 pages that was about the man taking off his wedding ring, and it sort of alludes to multiple men. You're taking off your polo, you're taking off your Armani suit, but the ritual of undressing, and then and the ring, taking off the ring. I like that part, and I like the beginning. So I was like, well, what if I kept those two pieces? What was happening in the culture at that moment on social media, this is true story, was these posts were going around where women who were very proudly, the side chick was like, I heart her husband. They were selling t-shirts. And then like the wives were coming back and it was something like, but I have his 401k. I don't know. It was just wild. And I was talking to a friend and we were joking, like, if there could just be an academy, like people could just learn how to play their role, like you wouldn't have a t-shirt like that, you would practice more discretion. So I love that idea of like formalizing this illicit arrangement. And I thought too about how typically the women in those situations are pitted against each other. And the man is, kind of, he's considered ancillary to the whole thing, which is not right. And I thought, well, what if I flip that? What if the woman who's, we even use the language side chick, what if she was centered instead? And what if she made the rules, literally? Because I love form. So I took my two pieces that I had and I was like, that was the first set of rules. And then the undressing part was the second rule, a set of rules. And then I thought, well, I can just make some more rules. Like, what would the rules be for someone like her? So I'm writing that. I'm having a lot of fun with it. And then I get to the about me, and it was out of sequence. I mean, I sequenced it later, but when I started writing that about me, and she says, and I make the best peach cobbler in town. And I was like, that's Olivia. That's Olivia from Peach Cobbler. I think I needed to know what happened to that girl. And so she was still up here. And there she was. So that's how that story came together.
Amazing. And it's always, for any and all, aspiring younger writers checking this out, there, that's a master class in how you've got to put in the work, you've got to revise, but also the story, it's hard to avoid sounding pretentious when we talk about these things, but this notion of the story can kind of tell you where it needs to go. But that doesn't happen unless you're open to kind of playing with form and
experimenting. Yep.
And I'd be curious if you could elaborate a little bit on, again, I think that's one of the tremendous strengths of this collection is that, you're a good enough writer that if they were all kind of traditional form, they'd ring true. But like we talked about the diary, we talked about, the letters, an instruction manual. That's obviously a very deliberate narrative choice. And what I think in addition to it being effective, I think what that also enables you to do as the writer is kind of compress a lot of exposition. So it's a very sound, effective strategy. But I'm curious, did some of these stories start, for lack of a better cliche, traditionally, and then you realized, here's how I can play with that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so, instructions was more traditional in form. Dear Sister was always a letter. And Jael was always the sort of dueling, narratives in the journal. But what I will say about my coming to use the different forms is something very basic. I get bored easily. And so it's a way to keep myself interested, to try to write it in a different way. And then form, forces certain choices, and that gives me something to do and something to kind of engage with. This is kind of why I'm a little nervous about writing a novel. It's like, unless my novel is a novel with a lot of different forms in it. But I borrow this from essay writing. There's as hermit crab essays, which take the form of ordinary things. I love that with nonfiction. And so, you can do the same thing with fiction. And with nonfiction, it's a way to tackle subject matters that are really sensitive, that may be really painful, and you kind of get lost in following the rules of the form. And once you can get going, you might discover some things that way. So I enjoy it with nonfiction, and enjoy it with fiction as well.
So you're gonna kill me, but a novel that plays with form and uses a lot of different narrative techniques, Moby Dick. He does. There's one scene that's like written as a play. There's one scene that's all dialogue. So maybe the white whale will have to come back into your life. But
if there's any reason to read it, that would be it. You got me.
But listen, it's ironic to me, because one of the things I was going to mention, and this reminds me and gives me an opportunity. There are a couple of stories in here that actually could and maybe should be novels. Like I think, well, just to think off the top of my head, I think Dear Sister, Peach Cobbler, and especially How to Make Love to a Physicist easily could be novels. I'm not saying they should be or that they should have been. In fact, I think they're perfect. But when I was reading this, so here's a kind of irony, right? When I was reading your collection, I was thinking this is someone that can and will write novels, because she has a sense of scope and an ability to create these characters that, boy, you want to follow that story.
Thank you.
And you get invested. I'd love you to talk a little bit about, because I have to say, I mean, I really, I hope is made clear, I love these stories, but How to Make Love to a Physicist to me is almost like a masterclass.
Thank you.
In terms of, I mean, as a reader, I've been around the block a few times as a writer, and that story bobbed and weaved. That story genuinely surprised and delighted me.
I'm glad.
But that compresses, even though, and that does follow a trajectory, right? Like that's certainly not like a set piece of an afternoon or a weekend, but so that traverses time, but in a way, again, kind of like what I was saying, or my intuition about Peach Cobbler, what you achieve there, we already kind of know what happened before and what might happen after, because of how strongly it's rendered. But maybe talk a little bit about how that story came together, or how that, you hear me, that could have been a novel.
So it's one of those where you get a first line and then it sits there and marinates, and then you come back a year or so. I don't know if it was a year, maybe close to a year later, but I got what became really the title and the refrain, How Do You Make Love to a Physicist? Because I had a crush on a physicist. I just thought he was the bee's knees. And so I came up with that. Alas, it was an unrequited crush. So I got to
awesome.
kind of, I know, right? Look at,
come on.
So,
you have respects then?
So, so I had fun with it, in the sense of I could truly just imagine the story, because there was no story between myself and the real guy, and so that character is not him, other than the fact that he's a physicist, and she's not me, but I knew the parts that would deal with science and religion, and I knew that was going to require some research on my part. And where they're talking about like this black hole phenomenon. I was reading up on that. And so I wrote it, and he and I are still friends, and I needed him to give me some feedback on the science to make sure it was accurate. And so he gave me some tweaks for the science. And then the conversation that the two of them have, where she's asking him how he reconciles religion and science, and he's talking about how, like, Einstein wasn't an atheist. That was a conversation that I had with the real life physicist, because I wanted the conversation to be authentic, and some of her misconceptions were things that misconceptions I've had, but I had never talk to a scientist about those things. And so he told me great stories about his childhood upbringing. He was raised Catholic, and then how he, made the transition and how he kind of reconciles it. So that was the most research I did for any story in the collection. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, we had long conversations, multiple, that got condensed, into the one scene that you see. But that was a lot of fun. So that's how that came about.
Well, so the research, when I was reading that, I have to say, I was thinking, I never assume anything about anyone, especially a writer, but I remember thinking, boy, she's smart. Right? Right? I mean, look at her getting all astrophysical.
Hey, right?
But again,
he made me look like I knew what I was talking about. And I had such a great, I sing her praises all the time. Sarah Georgie, my editor at West Virginia University Press, the book was about to go to press, and she said, I hope you don't mind, but there was just one thing in the whole discussion of the black hole that I wasn't clear on. So I contacted someone in the university and their like astrophysicist department, and they said it's actually, whatever. And I was like, this is so nerdy. I love it. Like we were totally nerding out in the story. So that was great.
That's fantastic. Well, so, I saved maybe my best compliment for last, but I have to say,
thank you.
And I hope, from my lips to, the universes, they made movies about Jesus' son. And of course, Robert Altman did Shortcuts on Raymond Carver. This is the first collection I've read in 20 years that I thought this would work as a movie, even though it's different stories. I don't know if that could or should happen, but I want it to happen.
Well, there's things I can't talk about right now, but there is definitely interest in adapting these stories for a screen. I will say that. So stay tuned.
I'm so not surprised to hear that.
I can't wait until I can say more, but yeah, I'm thrilled that I'll get the opportunity to revisit these characters.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
So, cognizant of time, I can go on for a while, but I did want to.
I love talking to you.
I did want to talk a little bit in closing, maybe about, because we talked about it at the beginning, but again, we have talked about, and if those of you watching home, go watch the 1455 interview.
Yes,
drops some knowledge there too. But we talk about community, and I think that's another. It isn't a cliche at all, but it could be like, all right, the writers' community. This notion of what's really inspired me about you, besides your writing and your personality, is the fact that you're really engaged, and it is a two-way. Let's face it, I know writers, and God bless them, right? I know writers that are engaged, but it's like, I'm getting all this praise. You are obviously very invested in dialoguing and doing your part. Just talk a little bit about what that means to you and how that happens.
And writers say this all the time, like when you're writing, you have no idea how it's going to land. Like maybe your handful of friends who are your trusted readers, how it's landing with them. But beyond that, you have no idea if you're going to be able to sell this book. And then if you sell it, you have no idea what, readers are going to, how they're going to respond to it. And so to have people, it's one thing, people like the book, that's great. But to have people say that they connected to the book, that it reminded them of something, or it made them question something, or they felt seen, that's so personal. It's such a personal engagement. And I didn't could not have predicted any of that. And so it's really an honor for, people to take the time, to read something that I wrote, but then to know that it mattered to them. People are baking peach cobbler. A woman dressed up like the cover of my book. And I
saw that.
I love it. And so, especially in this time when we're isolated physically, but also, we've gone through it the last 4 years, and for some of us more than 4 years, of just, being kind of disconnected and disillusioned. And so I don't take connecting with other people lightly or for granted, or people sharing a part of their lives. I mean, that's what's keeping us going. Doing one of the first events I did in the pandemic was your festival, the 1455 festival. And that sort of just set the tone that this is how we're going to get through anything that comes our way. And that's connecting with other people in our most tender places. And so I feel like people are sharing their tender places with me. And that's really, really an honor. And I don't take that lightly. And it makes me feel less alone in the world.
Yeah, so beautifully said. And I think, kind of to kind of wrap this up, what, I've tried to make it clear, and I say this very seriously, the book is a success artistically and on its own merit, it speaks volumes. But I think one of the reasons, right, and I think we've articulated this, that it's found an audience and it's connecting with people is because it's doing exactly what you just said, especially in a year where we were disconnected. And to it, what a gift you've given to the world to initiate dialogue, to make people interrogate their own lives and want to reach out, whether it's to you or to friends or to this literary community or the micro communities on social media. That's a tremendous gift. And you seem to really understand and are rightly humbled, but also I think empowered by the responsibility and the power that gives you. And it's a wonderful thing to behold. So I want to celebrate you as a literary citizen. You're an example to all of us. And it's been a real bright spot in 2020 to see. I said this to Douglas and I say it to you. We're in a very crass commercial world that's never going to change. And frankly, that's true of the literary world too, but bills have to be paid and et cetera. But when good books by good people,
yes.
Boy, is that a shot in the arm for all of us that want to see good things happen. So I'm along for the ride, and I've just been happy to celebrate and continue to, do my part to shine light on. I just couldn't recommend the book more highly.
Thank you.
I say that you are clearly a writer that we're going to be hearing from for a long time. And I say as both invitation and threat, we will hear from you again because you're a part of the family. So
yes. Thank you for creating spaces like this. I didn't know what to expect about literary community either, other than my little corner of the world. And so as I said, yours was the first, and so it gave me a sense of what's possible in terms of just genuine engagement. And I just appreciate you so much and how much you love books and love writers. That always comes through. So thank you.
Right on. Well, it's totally my pleasure. And my only wish for 2021 is that this is not the last time you and I talk in this format.
It won't be.
You are a welcome guest anytime. And we are planning to open a year-round writers retreat in Winchester, Virginia. Those doors will swing wide.
I'm looking forward to that. Thank you.
Also, Deesha, congratulations. Thank you. You're an inspiring force. I wish you all the best, and to be continued. But for now, enjoy. The ride's not over. I mean, it's going to continue in other ways, but the ride for Secret Lives is far from completed. So please enjoy that, and you richly deserve all this attention, and it's just great to see.
Thank you so much, and I'll keep you posted.
Right on. Oh, do we get in closing? I was a very good boy. I didn't say a word. Do we get a benediction from Fudgy?
Oh yeah, she's asleep. Oh, but I can bring her up here. Fudgy Lou. She's like, what is going on here? Oh my gosh. Poor baby.
No comfort. There she is.
Oh, she's so sleepy.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. This
there
is
it
my
is.
Sweet girl. Yeah.
Deesha, as a writer, as an interviewee, and as a friend, you always deliver. So there it is.
Thank you so much.
We've done all we can do here.
She's like, what am I doing?
You take care. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Good night.
All right. And thanks again to our pals at Potter's House. Let me say again, please, like, do I need to say any more? You want this book, gift this book, get a couple of copies, support independent booksellers, check out the Potter's House and the work they're doing, check out Deesha's book and pay it forward. And we'll see you all again soon. Thank you for being here. Good night.
Good night.
Thank you so much for joining us. Make sure you follow us on our social media channels to stay up to date with what's new for 1455. And also, we would like to ask for your support. We depend on champions like you to keep us going. Visit 1455litarts.org and click support to make a contribution in any amount. We'll see you soon.